Okay, welcome to the 72nd episode of an Evolving Man podcast. Today, I'm excited to be speaking to Yuval Mann. Yuval is the founder of the Sensual Alchemy School of Integrated Sexuality, and he spent well over 10,000 hours learning, experimenting, exploring, and teaching people about sex and love. He also hosts the Sensual Alchemy Podcast. Welcome, Yuval.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
A pleasure. How I'd love to begin the podcast is for you to share a bit about your journey, Yuval. How did you arrive at doing the work you do around sensuality? I'd be fascinated to hear.
With pleasure. I grew up I was born in a secular family in Israel. My parents were quite hippie, into psychedelics and spiritual modalities and things of that nature. But something happened when I was around like 10, 11, and we switched completely to very orthodox Judaism. And I was moved from the democratic school of Waldorf school, for someone who knows what it is, to Cheder, which is like boys only religious institute. And without going into too much details, just for the sake of clarity, this is a place in which there is absolutely no, like the Jewish institutes, much like a lot of Orthodox religious groups, there is no sex education whatsoever. Not even the futile one that you get in a normal secular school. Not even that. There's not a conversation about anything, let alone in any interaction with women or girls whatsoever. Until you finally, between the age of 21 to 25, usually you get suited with someone, you meet them for 3 to 5 times, you get married, and that's it. Like that's the first interaction you have, the first intimate interaction you have with a woman. I clearly remember going through puberty and having these sexual experiences with dreams and different. I didn't dare masturbating because even though I wasn't taught that, it's kind of like insinuated that it's a big sin. Which, by the way, it's something that has no mention in any place in the Jewish tradition. It's something that is very much influenced by later Christianity and other schools of thought. But there is no place in Judaism that mentions that pleasure or masturbation or sex is a sin. But somehow it's kind of like the culture that has been created. And I remember feeling incredibly guilty about it, just to kind of understand the kind of attitude that I grew up in. I think a lot of people, regardless of their background, can resonate with that to some degree. I think this is largely the approach that our culture have to sexuality, very hiding, very secretive, very taboo. I left the community. I was always a rebel. I always had questions when I shouldn't. I always, questioned the authority and questioned what is around me and always asked why. I think especially because I grew up not religious in my formative years. And I had a lot of chance to explore. I was a very curious kid. I was a bookworm, and I always read sci-fi and science and history. So naturally, I had a lot of questions, like who says that God said that and did that, and why like that and not like that? Needless to say, they didn't like that. And I was always I always felt not at home. I always felt like an outcast in the community, and like I never belonged really. And when I left, I felt this insatiable. I immediately started traveling the world, and I felt an insatiable desire to connect with humans in general, but to connect with women in particular. I felt this like primordial erotic drive to have relationships, to connect with women. And the more I did, the more I enjoyed it deeply, and the more I felt the desire to understand it better. In the beginning, I felt very shy and kind of not in the know around the topic naturally, because I had zero experience. I served 3 years in the, one moment. I don't know what happened.
I'm not sure your video went.
Can you see me?
I can see you. Yeah.
All right. Sorry about that. I
So
don't know
you
what
were
happened.
traveling, meeting women, quite shy.
And yes, I had no experience, and I felt quite, yeah, I didn't know how to approach it all. When I was in the Israeli army, which I was unfortunately forced into,
Mm.
um, everybody around me were in their 18 to 19, 20, and everybody had experiences already since they're like 14, 15, 16. And I felt very shy about being a virgin and not, having any experiences. So when I finally left, I was like, wow, I'm so curious. I'm so ready to explore. I'm so open to it. And that put me on a very interesting path of exploration for the coming decade of traveling the world, experimenting and exploring sex positive scenes, kink and BDSM communities, bondage communities, participating and facilitating a lot of sex positive events, just trying to explore and openly experience as many intimate sexual relational experiences as I possibly can. I got to meet beautiful mentors and teachers along the way, to read literature, to try things for myself, to also behave in ways that I later realized are not fully in integrity, and propelled me, and the feedback that I got propelled me to do better, to get better, to care more. And I've never thought that it's going to be a career. I've never thought it's going to be something that I'm actually do. I was working in a variety of different jobs over the years. I worked in tech. I started a few companies of my own, and I never thought this is going to be something that I'll actually do for a living. It was just something happening in the background for leisure, in my own time. And then about 3 years ago, during the pandemic, I was stuck in Paradise Island in Copenhagen, and through a very synchronized, beautiful turn of events, it just so happened that everything in my life at that moment kind of made it so this seemed like the most authentic expression of who I am. I wasn't thinking or strategizing like, oh, what should I do next? It just felt right, and it kind of happened through me in and of itself. And since then, it has been happening effortlessly, and the response was very positive and open. And so I just kept going, and here we are.
Beautiful. What an amazing story. Um, I spent some time in Israel as a teenager. Where did I go to? Tel Aviv, but Haifa. Did like an exchange over a few years between my city and yeah, this was like 1991, I think 92. Um, so I kind of met a lot of people who were going into the Israeli army and things like that. So sounds like a fascinating journey. Wow. And Kopang, yeah, one of my guests, I think from 2 or 3 ago, Shashi Saluna. I think she had a center, or she was part of the center, the sanctuary in Kopanang for.
Yeah, I heard about it, I think. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I guess one of the thing I'm fascinated by on this podcast is about trauma. And I'd love for us to segue into talking a little bit about sexuality and trauma. It sounds like, as you were sharing, a lot of the spiritual traditions are quite strict around sex. That's what I found growing up. The word masturbate in the British language, in English, is I think it means something like to beat oneself or to hurt oneself. If you go back to the Latin, I was just looking through stupare or something like that. So yeah, I'd love for you to share a little bit about your experience and maybe linking that into trauma.
I mean, it makes so much sense, right? This the way we think about self-pleasure and the wordings that we created around it are a direct reflection of our general attitude towards pleasure. We have masturbation, which I'm discovering through you that it's coming from like beating oneself, some form of violence, self-inflicted violence. There is fornication, which also has all kinds of negative connotations, and a variety of others, which, by the way, mostly exist in English. I think a lot of Other language, especially more native languages, have far more exploratory, creative, positive kind of wordings to masturbation and self-pleasure. But I think it makes total sense. The idea, the Judeo-Christian idea that sexuality is a sin, that masturbation and self-pleasure is a sin, that pleasure in general is a sin, and one should suffer all the way to God, is being reflected by the way we think about it. And furthermore, this idea of beating oneself, there's also the saying beating your meat as a way of like masturbation, which I think really speaks to the way the majority of men self-pleasure, rather than something that is a celebration of one's pleasure, an exploration of one's body in erotic attraction and fantasy world. It is something that we do largely in front of an external stimuli, very voyeuristic, like looking at other people having sex, wishing we were part of that interaction, and as quickly, as ferociously as possible, beating the meat to completion, to some arbitrary peak point of very futile kind of ejaculatory event, which afterwards we feel a variety of sensations, from sadness to guilt to shame to all kinds of things. So it's a very convoluted experience that a lot of people have around their sexuality. And I think it's being reflected very clearly in the language that we have around it. Personally, I like to use self-pleasure. Feels more positively reflected on the way I perceive the importance of exploring one's pleasure and amplifying pleasure in one's body and in one's life. But yeah.
Thank you. Another interesting one is a vagina. In the Latin, that means somewhere to sheathe one's sword, I believe. And whereas yoni means birthplace of the universe. So there's the difference between the two traditions, and it's like, wow, difference there.
Absolutely. And traditions that have been celebrating, until now, traditions like Buddhism, Hinduism, and many other traditions around the world have an attitude of worship towards pleasure, towards sex, towards sensual union, and towards male and female genitalia. Most of the Hindu gods in the pantheon are, constantly engaging and portrayed as engaging in sexual union with their consorts. They often show either half naked or fully naked bodies. Like, it's much more out there than what we have in the Judeo-Christian religions of the West.
Thank you. So what would you say, Yuval, if we have grown up with this background? I mean, a lot of my listeners have been to boarding schools or had some form of childhood trauma. What would you say that if someone's like, actually, I want to heal this, I want to start to, celebrate my body to pleasure and not feel the shame? What do you guide people through, Yuval?
Yeah, I think the first place that I always take people into is to come back to their body. I think that there is a lot of conversation about trauma and about wounding and about the way that our genetic making and our childhood experiences and past experiences have been affected our nervous system configuration and affect the way we experience life and relationships in this particular moment, none of which I'm a particular expert on. But I think largely in our culture, there is a big kind of movement of speaking about things a lot in therapy language. And everything is trauma, everything is, talking about, which is important, which is beautiful, which is necessary for our growth and growing up. And I think when there is something in your life that is currently stopping you from experiencing your life fully and openly and comfortably and feeling peace in your body, feeling pleasure, connecting with other people, working for a living and making something that you enjoy in your life, and go and have therapy and take care of that and heal from that. But I think, at least as far as my work is concerned, I'm not about healing. I feel like healing is not something that you consciously do. It's something that happens the more you come back to your body, the more you become a more authentic expression of the evolutionary currents that flow through you in this lifetime, this unique way in which you are meant to express yourself in the world. And the more you do that, and the more you become connected to these signals, these feelings, these needs in your body, the more healing happens, right? The more you are welcoming your experiences rather than seeing them as enemies, the more you are able to allow them to digest well through your body and come to their natural conclusion. And this is more the kind of stuff that I care about, or the kind of work that I'm interested about doing. And when it comes to sexuality, it's just a platform for me to explore these things, because I see that sexuality and relationships is just one of the most powerful platforms in our life from which to explore. It's a place in our life that we show up in naked and vulnerable ways. And it's a place in our life that reflects, maybe in the clearest way, all the ways in which we are stopping ourselves from being authentic and open and fully alive. And this is why I like to start there. So whatever it is that someone is experiencing, whether it's difficulty lasting longer, difficulties getting hard, difficulty arriving to an orgasm, experiencing pleasure, difficulty to even connect intimately with someone, difficulty expressing one's needs, difficulty exploring one's needs, and so on and so forth, whatever that might be, I like to approach it as an opportunity, not an issue that you are trying to solve, as a way of your body telling you where you're at right now and signaling you exactly your path moving forward. So it's coming back to the body, coming back to the body, coming back to the body, and allowing this infinite evolutionary intelligence that is our body, that expresses itself as our body, to lead the way, rather than the over-intellectualizing of our feelings and the therapeuticizing of our feelings, and labeling every experience that we have as trauma.
Thank you. I love that. Yeah, sexuality, relationships, and not about healing. Do you have an exercise or something you would guide someone into who's wanting to become more present in their bodies?
So there are many, and usually when I work with people, I don't just give them, a cookie cutter practice. I feel like, at least my own philosophy is that every human being is a path in and of itself, and no framework or 1, 2, 3 step method or modality or methodology can work for everybody in the same way. But I would say that the breath is a phenomenal place to start. It's a phenomenal single point, always available, always present, powerful way to come back to our body and regulate our nervous system. And so whether it's someone who is feeling some form of anxiety around their sexual expression, or finding it hard to arrive to an orgasm with a partner, experiencing premature ejaculation, erectile dysfunction, whatever, all these things that a lot of people experience, start with breathing. Take a deep, nourishing, deepening breath through your nose and exhale with a sigh. Do that for a little bit, and you notice immediately how you fall back into presence, how your body soften. I don't like to use the word relax, because relax is like I do something to relax. It's another activity. We're not talking about activities. It's a softening. Our anxieties are being expressed in the way that we hold our body, how much tension we build up in the body. And there is a softening that happens with the breath. It allows us to come back to presence. Sexuality is not a performance, and you are not performing for anybody. It's a mutual exploration. And sexual bliss is opening up to whatever is coming up for both of you, and allow a space of playful exploration, healing, openness, creativity to unfold. And it can look like in all kinds of ways. Sometimes it's incredibly in the flow and pleasurable, and oftentimes it's full with human awkwardness and tensions and fears and anxieties and inhibitions, because we are human beings. The art is opening up to all of it. and allowing it to be vulnerably expressed, and allow ourselves to make art with it, whatever that is.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, coming back to something you said earlier about, masturbation, self-pleasuring is that kind of goal. We're trying to get somewhere.
Yeah.
Do you feel the same with sexuality? When I spoke to Shashi Saluna's partner, Shahid, saying for men to slow down, have you found that's been helpful as well for us? Because we're so goal-orientated as Westerners, Judeo-Christian, for us to slow down regarding sex.
Absolutely. I think the goal-oriented disciplinarian approach that we have towards everything in our life expresses itself in sexuality from the moment we are engaging with a partner and incapable of having just genuine non-sexual intimacy, to feel grounded, to feel safe with each other, and slowly allow eroticism and sexuality to emerge from that. We immediately want to jump. Okay, I want to conquer. I want to go there. I want to get there. To how we view sex as penetration is like the ultimate part of sex, when in reality, it's one of the many, many, many ways in which sexuality can be expressed, and not even close to be the most pleasurable one for most people. To how we obsessed about orgasm, and making our partner orgasm, especially men, when in reality, it's as pleasurable as it is and as important as frequent orgasms in our life, in our relationships are. It's by no means the point of the whole entire interaction. And no matter how many orgasms are there, if there is no depth, if there is no creativity, if there is no presence, it's not going to be satisfactory. It's not going to give both of you what you really, really are looking for. So yeah, definitely the slowing down aspect of it, especially through my work, I see that women are naturally more susceptible and desiring that kind of slowness. I don't think there is anything inherent to men or women. I think that it's more just programming and conditioning. But men have this mentality of, a lot of men at least, based on how we were brought up, have this mentality of going there as quickly as possible. And when you think about how long on average it takes to a woman to start feeling aroused, let alone arrive to some form of climax, whether it's the clitoral climax that we usually call an orgasm, or full body orgasm, or nipple orgasm, or all kinds of the hundreds of orgasms that she can experience, she needs to go there slowly. Her mind needs to be properly stimulated. There needs to be a lot of anticipation. Even in the way that we talk about foreplay, we are missing the point entirely. Most people think that foreplay is like making out. But foreplay is not even touching. It starts before you even touch each other. The great scholar and mentor, Esther Perel, says, sex doesn't start when you get into the room and start taking each other's clothes off. It started after the last time you've had sex, after the last time you've orgasmed. It's in all the way that you are building up tension, texting to each other, looking at each other, touching each other non-sexually in between, and in the way that you think about each other and think about sex and build up anticipation to the moment of finally connecting with each other in sexual union. That is foreplay. And so slowness is such a phenomenal direction to take. And that, it's not to say that sometimes fast and hard is not fun and pleasurable, but that in 99% of cases, it's not going to be. And even when it is, there needs to be a good enough build-up for that to be pleasurable. So yeah.
Thank you. Beautiful. I love that. It kind of makes me wonder with men whether it's because as boys I grew up in an institution, boarding school, where I had no privacy, so it had to be quick if I was going to self-pleasure. It had to be as quick as possible. And I wonder with boys growing up is that we've just trained our nervous system that it's got to be as quick as possible. And therefore we take that into sex because we've not had that safe space that, it's okay to self-pleasure as a teenager, to explore our bodies. Because I remember when I was 9 or 10, having sexual relations, just exploring a body of another boy, me and another boy with the same age. And then later on, when I got to boarding school, I realized there was such a shame. Oh no, that's wrong, that's evil. And so I stopped doing that. And I wonder if that's then taken into sex, when you're with the partner.
That's an interesting perspective. I actually haven't thought about that part. I think that is definitely a contributor. And there are other aspects of it, such as, of course, evolution, things that are outside of our control. I think that the last, a few 100,000 years of evolutionary process, at least the last 50,000, let's say, has optimized for men to ejaculate as quickly as possible for the furtherness of the species. I think that it's very common in animal species. It's not all, but it's very common in animal species that ejaculation happens very, very quickly, and it's purely, for creating the next evolutionary life.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, there are a lot of examples of how animals engage in recreational sex and just for the sake of pleasure. So that doesn't mean that doesn't exist in nature, but it makes sense how thousands and thousands of years. I think on top of that, and on top of what you said, there is also the way in which we later on keep engaging with our bodies and keep conditioning our nervous system, because ejaculation is a nervous system response. Basically, it's a stress response of the sympathetic nervous system, interestingly enough. And so we keep conditioning ourselves to ejaculate as quickly as possible the moment that pleasure intensifies in the body to a certain degree. And we do it again and again and again. And naturally, the body kind of get into a certain way in which things are happening. So it makes sense that this is how we also then express ourselves with a partner, right? Like we will try to get to ejaculation as quickly as possible, and maybe even imagine that our partner is supposed to arrive to orgasm as quickly as we do. And it takes awareness and practice and openness and willingness and detaching our sense of value and sense of self from our sexual performance to start learning, to start curiously exploring, to start expanding.
Thank you, Yuval. That's fascinating. And I'm kind of wondering about segueing into talking about porn and porn addiction, because one of the ways I believe we've trained ourselves as a modern man, certainly, is that we watch pornography and we're training ourselves to ejaculate very quickly, and rather than it just being slowed down. So what do you see in the world of sex and and porn, and what we can do if we feel we're addicted to porn?
I think that addiction is an interesting thing. First of all, I would say that a lot of people self-diagnose themselves as addicted to certain things without proper justification for it. Like people say, I have erectile dysfunction, and getting soft sometimes during sex does not subscribe as you having erectile dysfunction. You watching pornography a few times a week and masturbating does not subscribe as being addicted to porn or addicted to sex. People who are truly addicted to something, with drugs, sex, alcohol, they are so engaged in that activity to the point of being completely detrimental to every other aspect of their life. It is a devastating experience to be addicted to sex, addicted to porn. So I think we need to be careful about self-diagnosing with these things. That being said, if one, and we put aside people who experience that kind of experience, because I think there are deep underlying emotional, psychological experiences that should be treated properly by therapists and professionals, which I'm not. But let's talk about people who do engage in whatever forms of pornographic consumption and just feel that it's just not working in their best interest, sexually, intimately, and so on. I think that it's a conversation that requires a lot of nuance. Of course, pornography is not an inherently bad thing. It played a very important role in our society in the invoking and being part of the sexual renaissance and removing some of the shame and the taboo that we have around sexuality throughout the last decades. That being said, the industry itself has a lot of problems in it. There is a lot of unethical playing out, human trafficking, violence of all kinds, and rape involved in a lot of pornographic productions. There are also ethical companies that do really well and really beautifully. There are also independent creators that decide who they are working with and when, if they're even working with someone, which is a wonderful thing. That's one thing. I think on an individual level, it's really a conversation that one should have with themselves. It's important not to listen to what other people tell you should or shouldn't do, but feel it with yourself. Do you feel that you would like that your current way of exploring your sexuality and your pornographic consumption is taking away in some level from your ability to show up as authentically and openly, as pleasurably as you can with your partner or with women or with men, partners in general? Is it taking away from your ability to enjoy your life, to feel pleasure in your body, to explore your body, to have beautiful full body orgasms, whatever that might be? If that is the case, then yes, explore what else is possible for you. I highly recommend people, if they feel that way, to take a break, to explore touching themselves, using their imagination for a while, and if not that, then at least look at what kind of pornography you are watching. I know that in my journey, the more I grew, the more I developed and liberated my own sexuality, I noticed a pattern in which types of pornography that used to stimulate me, that used to, get me on, I can't even look at them anymore, right? Pornography, the majority, the 90% of pornography that you see out there is, of course, naturally performative. It's all completely fake. It's very genital focused, very male pleasure, male gaze focused. It's not about intimacy. It's not about pleasure. It's not about connection, human connection. There is porn out there that is, but it's rare. And when I look at the majority of porn today, I'm looking at them like this. I see genitals and I see fucking, but that doesn't do anything to me because I know that there is no pleasure involved in this. I know that the people who are in this scene are really suffering right now, and putting a face and making noises that are entirely fake. And what does that do to my sexuality when this is what I consume for my pleasure? How is that going to influence the way I share myself sexually and the way that I enjoy pleasure and with another being, and so on and so forth? And so if you are continuing to watch pornography, check out the particular type that you're watching. Try audio pornography, for example. I'm creating audio erotica stories for a company called Quinn. It's a beautiful app with a lot of creators that creates ethical, artistic, erotic audios. It's a phenomenal new way to explore pleasure. Check out ethical pornography productions, companies, and creators. And even if you decide to watch whatever is available free online, I would highly recommend at least changing your posture, the way you move, like move around a little bit more, take your time, edge yourself, enjoy your pleasure, deepen your breath, feel your body as you're doing so, rather than being this super stationary, passive, as quickly as possible as you can. So as you can see, I'm avoiding saying like black and white, do or don't, good or bad. I think every human being is its own path, and this conversation needs to have a lot of nuance. But that's what I would recommend starting from.
Thank you, Yuval. Yeah, it's interesting. I think for me, pornography was quite a big outlet as a child, being in an institution with very little contact with girls. So I got an addiction to it. And then I kind of dropped it for a number of years. I spent time as a Buddhist monk, so I had to let go. So I was celibate for the 3.5 years I was there. But then took it back up again. And then since I've been married now 15 years, I kind of let it go, noticing the difference and becoming more present with my body. I still have issues, but it's like, being able to focus more. So I love what you say about just stroking and just connecting with the self. That's beautiful. I mean, moving into shame, I know you mentioned, growing up, that shame. I felt the shame. What do you teach people, who do hold shame around sex? What can we do to start letting this go, Yuval?
So I have quite an artistic approach to emotional experiences, and I want to make a distinction between emotions, feelings, and then thought patterns about what we feel. So feelings is the raw physical sensations that we have in our body. Usually it appears somewhere on the center of our body, from the top of our head to our pelvis. And we feel things in our groin, in our stomach, in our abdomen, in our heart space, in our throat, in our head, depending on the situations. And it's sensations of tightness and openness, sensations of comfort and discomfort, very simple, raw sensations. Those are feelings, and they always signal an immediate need, desire, something that we would feel, something that we need, something that wants to be digested. Emotions is the kind of labels that we give to a lot of these, and it's just my way of talking about it. It's not like a dictionary, definitions, but this is how I like to refer to it. Emotions are more like the labels that we put on some of these sensations. Shame is one of them. Anger, sadness, happiness, joy, and so on and so forth. Like states of being is ways in which we kind of codify some of these very raw and ambiguous feelings that we have in our body. So when we say anger, try to pinpoint what sensation it actually is, because underlying anger, there is a variety, a full range of physical sensations and subtle and sensory experiences. And so is shame. When you say shame, there is a lot there. So what I point people towards when we realize there is some, the shame is in play, let's say, around sexuality, I point them to try to go beyond the label of I feel shame, I feel this, I feel that, and then go into the intellectualizing of it. Where in childhood does it come from, and why is it here, and so on and so forth. Just put it all on hold for a moment and focus on the sensation in the body. What do I actually feel when I say I feel shame? Where there is tightness, there is softness, there is openness, there is what are the raw sensations that I feel in the body? Don't even give them names, just feel into it. Come back to your body and let that be digested in the moment, using your breath, coming back to the body, just being with your emotions. And you realize that under the shame is just a super arbitrary label onto a full range of bodily experiences. So from that perspective, shame becomes not a foe, but rather a friend. It's a evolutionary directional expression. It's taking you somewhere. And a way that I like to communicate that is you can transmute that shame into vulnerability, because vulnerability is something that is absolutely essential for connection, for human connection, but you can also observe it in nature. Everything requires vulnerability to connect with everything else and produce new life. Vulnerability, the potential for demise, right? Every new evolutionary relationship, in order to happen, both sides open themselves up to the potential of that not working and something dies. And so are we. Vulnerability is the willingness to be exposed, to be exposed, to be open to get hurt, to show who we are fully and what we are experiencing. So you turn that shame into vulnerability by expressing what it is that you actually feel, what you sense in your body. So in the moment that arises and it shows up as shame, let's say you self-pleasure and you feel something like, oh, am I worthy of pleasure? Why am I doing this? Something feels off or weird. Go and stand in front of a mirror and just witness your body. And notice the thought patterns, the emotion labels, and the raw sensations in your body of how does it actually feel. Sometimes people report feeling repulsion, disgust, judgment, which are all under shame, right? Like I just gave a few more labels that are all under shame, but we don't really see the nuance and the kind of subtleties between all of these things when we just label them, oh, I feel shame. So walk in front of a mirror, take a deep breath, give yourself some pleasure, touch your body, notice what comes up without resistance, without trying to heal yourself or fix yourself or regard yourself as broken. Just be with it. Because when you focus on the sensations of the body, you realize, and you can have a direct experience of it, you don't have to listen to me. You realize that those feelings are not asking to be healed. They are not asking for you to do anything about it. They are just asking to be heard. It's like a little child inside, the seed from which you've been created from, asking to be acknowledged. And when you just give it its full space, when you're just being with that feeling, it's going to naturally be digested and arrive to its conclusion. Sometimes it will teach you an insight, and sometimes it's just going to feel like a new surge of energy opens up in your body and you're becoming free. Either way, that is how I would speak about approaching not just shame, but just feelings in general.
That's really beautiful. I love that. What you say about vulnerability, I've mentioned this a few times because it keeps coming up in podcasts. Spoke to the director of a film called The Work, which is about men's work going into prison. It's a very beautiful film. And he says in the interview that vulnerability is our superpower. So I love what you're saying there. Our willingness to be hurt. And I feel often the people I work with or in the field of trauma or, boarding school is that there's almost this unwillingness to be hurt anymore. And I'd love to talk a little bit about dissociation. I see this as a very common thing, especially for British people, and especially those who've been in these institutions, is we've dissociated, gone up into our head, and we really struggle to be in our bodies. And I almost see this as a reflection with how we are with the world, with Mother Earth, is we're not in real connection with her because we've disappeared. I'd like you to share a little bit about dissociation. If you've got someone who comes to you who's totally dissociated, they're not in their bodies.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned the separation that we have from the earth, because talking about Judeo-Christian values, we grew up under the absolute and total illusion that we have been created, that we've been created out of thin air by a separated God that is existing somewhere outside of this world or outside of ourselves, rather than the truth, the observable truth, that is that we have been emerged, that we emerged from this ecosystem, that we emerged from this earth, that we emerged from this cosmos, and that God is merely a word, a symbol to try to point out to that which we cannot comprehend, to the entirety of it all, that which we emerged from and is being expressed through us, by us. And I think that dichotomy, that sense of separateness is expressed in the way that we experience religion and God and what is God, in the way that we experience human societies, and the way that we build every single facet of our human societies, monetary systems, political systems, governmental systems, and so on and so forth. The way that we cultivate the earth in mono agriculture that is homogeneous, monotonous, that is extraction rather than harmonious work with the elements that humans have been playfully experimenting with for way, way, way longer, and before the agriculture and the industrial revolutions. And all of these things are also expressed in the way that we be with each other, be in the world, be in relations, be in sexual, intimate, relational connections. In that we experience ourselves as something separated, not just separated from the ecosystems that we emerged from, but separated from each other. If you are happening somewhere outside of myself, rather than yet another expression of the same source that I am, then my relationship with you is merely a means to an end for me to experience some egoistic, to reinforce the illusion of my egocentric, separated self. And so relationships become means to an end. And so I'm going to connect with people sexually to get validated, to reinforce this ego structure that I have. I'm going to connect. I'm going to do work in the world in order to enrich myself rather than contribute and share love in the world and share my creativity and expression authentically and honestly, and so on and so forth. And so vulnerability is when we realize that we are one, that everything is one, that nothing in existence, and I'm not talking from, you don't have to buy into any belief system, you don't need to get into any new doctrine or religion. This is something that every human being can have a direct, self-evident experience of by just observing everything, by just observing themselves and nature, that nothing, no matter how much and how hard you look, nothing has a center in which it exists in separation from everything else. You can observe it through a scientific lens, through biology, through physics, through mathematics, you can observe that through anthropology, sociology, history. You can observe that through any mode that you can imagine, philosophy, intellectualizing it. You can talk about it from a religious, mystical perspective, whatever you want. Everything always points out to the direction of how everything is connected, interconnected, in constant relationship with everything else just to exist. Look at your body. This thing that this is my body. It's made out of more than 17% not even human DNA. It's just amoebas and all kinds of ecosystems living inside and as this body. You're made out of particles, subparticles, and molecules and chemistry that is shared with everything and everyone else. Where exactly is the center in which you call I? Where do we draw the line, right? And in order for this amalgamation of things to exist, it needs to constantly be touched and touch everything around, from the oxygen and the carbon that it breathes to, physical touch, to touch with ingredients and food and so on and so forth all the time. And it's so true with each other. We cannot exist without physical touch, without intimacy. This is just, it's not just something we do, it's what we are. Intimacy, sexuality, it's not something we do, it's not a human activity, it's a human nature. There were experiments done that they put a baby in isolation, and they almost died. And then later on in life experienced severe trauma from this lack of nourishing touch. And when you understand all of that, you understand that, yes, interconnectedness, connection is what we are. And vulnerability to me is the language of that connectedness. It's how we come back to that connectedness, by exposing who we are truly as authentically as we can. And you mentioned that a lot of people, especially if they experience trauma, they have this aversion of opening up because they may experience more hurt. And that is absolutely valid, And it's something that requires deep contemplation, inner work, and a certain amount of healing journey of some sort to come to a place of feeling safe again in the world. But ultimately, I think from this perspective of interconnectedness, there is a deep liberating realization which transcends the therapy and the healing modalities you can do, in which is coming to a notion in which you are inherently connected to everything. That life is not something that happens to you, but it's something that expresses itself through you as you and towards everything else. And as such, you are inherently always safe. Your sense of intimacy and love doesn't come from outside means. It is always here. And it exists whether you're feeling pleasure or pain, whether you are being nourished and accepted or hurt and exposed. Whatever the experience is, you're always safe. You're always at home, in the home of this life that you are. Yeah, That is what I would say.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, we are one. To touch and be touched. It makes me reflect. You mentioned you spent some time in Central America. I think there's a Mayan phrase which says in Lakesh, I am another you.
Wow, I love it.
And I really love that. I found that I went to Mexico a few years ago with my wife, and we visited the sacred sites around the Yucatan, and the Mayan people just had such big hearts, and it was that real sense of I am another you. So I can really hear that. So yeah, I mean, another question I had, probably got about 5-10 minutes left, is around sex, Kabbalah, mysticism. You've started to talk about I am another, like we are one. I'd love you to share a little bit. I'm fascinated. I haven't studied much Kabbalah, but a number of years ago. And I saw you had a podcast about that. So yeah.
Me neither, actually. I had one podcast interview with a good friend and a colleague of mine that has a channel called Seekers of Unity, who was very much a scholar and an avid practitioner of Judaism, mystical Judaism and Kabbalah. And we had a beautiful conversation about it on my podcast. But I think I would say that, and it's also something that he emphasized throughout his work, that that's the gist of his work, is that throughout all human societies, throughout all human schools of thoughts, philosophy systems, religions, practices, and so on and so forth, there was always a thread. There was always a common ground, an observable, self-evident truth, which is exactly what we've spoken about. That it is all interconnected. It is all one. And I think it's something that is being expressed in very hard to decipher ways, but nevertheless, in Jewish Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism, there is also lineages of Christian mysticism and Islam mysticism, such as Master Eckhart and his students, and as well as Sufism in Islam, and every other tradition has a mystical, path to it, which was all revolving around the exploration, the practices, the systems of thought that can take one into liberating oneself from the illusion of separation and into the experience of oneness. I think that, again, it's not something that you have to be in a religious system to realize. It's not something that you need to do something in particular to realize. It's not something that you need to even be remotely spiritual to realize. You can see and witness. I'm following and curiously learning from a lot of people who are secular scientists, and each in their own field. And those are the people that I like to follow. The others, I don't care much about their work, but the people that I can see that I realized as well. People who use their work and their exploration of the natural world to realize the exact same thing. Biologists and physicists and astrophysicists that through the lens of their curious, playful exploration of the natural world arrive at the same conclusions. I think there are quite a few writings by Einstein that for a lot of people can sound incredibly spiritual. And talk about this idea, this oneness. And I think, Jewish mysticism is just one of the places that is being expressed. And every school of thought, every practitioner, every lineage is ultimately about that. That's the ultimate ocean that all the rivers want to flow into. And from that perspective, all religions are one, all gods are one, all humans are one, all things are one. And me particularly, I happen to explore that notion of oneness through the lens of sexual union, through the lens of relationships. That's just the the particular platform that I resonated with most and that allow me to help people get to this realization in a self-evident way, in the most effortless way, is using their sexual experiences. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Yuval. It's really beautiful. Really enjoyed speaking to you today. I'd love for you, as we start tying this together, any last thoughts that you'd love to share around sexuality or, relationships, trauma, or to people who are listening?
Yeah, I think tying it all together, it will be perfect in place to maybe convey that whatever it is that you're experiencing sexually can start teach you whatever it is that you need to learn and allow you to unlock the next level in the game of life. When you stop seeing it as a problem, but rather an incredible evolutionary opportunity for exploration, playfulness, transmutation, whatever that might be. If it's past trauma that you've experienced and keep recurring in your sexual experiences, if it's sexual performance issues and anxieties of all kinds, if it's relational challenges around intimacy and relationships, whatever that might be, embrace it, open up to it, re-examine it with playful, loving eyes, and it will take you to beautiful places.
Beautiful words. Thank you. Thank you. How do people find out more about you, Yuval?
I'm in every social media imaginable. I'm just Yuval Mann, and also my website, yuvalmann.com. Yeah.
Great. Well, I'll put your links into the description below, so people please do go and look out Yuval's work. He's got some great podcasts out there, lots of amazing videos on YouTube. So I'll put links in the bottom. But yeah, thank you so much for your time. I found it very insightful and very lovely to speak to you. So thank you, Yuval.
Absolutely my pleasure. Thank you, Pierre.